something is going to happen. 5 stars. I don't even know what to do with myself anymore. Had a bit of a complex, but who doesn't? I hated that decision. It feels criminal to do this to one of my friends. I guess what we can say for vampires is maybe math is not their strong suit. Hello humans, it's just Martine, and today we're going to be reading some of my friends' favorite books from 2024. Around this time of year, a lot of people read people's favorite books from the year before, and I am no exception. Some of my friends and I, we have this spreadsheet where we write our favorite books of the year, and then we each try to pick one. All my friends are linked down below. Some of them have already posted videos about this, reading some of my favorites, so if you're at all interested in that, I recommend them. Obviously, I love them, but it's my chance to read their books for a couple of reasons. One, because it's fun, and two, because I could really use some good recommendations right now, especially as I'm in the midst of Kindle clear out episodes and such. It would be great to read books that I have a chance of really loving. That's the goal of this video. It is, I'll admit it, mainly me standing right here in different outfits on different days talking about books, but it's still a video. So without further ado, we're going to jump back in time to sometime in January when I finished reading Lizzie's pick. I have put off filming this review for so many days now because I have feelings and I don't know how to express them. For my very first pick for this, I chose a book from Lizzie's list, Lizzie from Lizzie's Literary Life. I picked Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow because, full disclosure, I already had a hold on it that I kept clicking deliver later on. So when I saw it was on her list, I was like, perfect, that's the choice. And I am giving it 5 stars. So lots to talk about here. First of all, what is this book about? The setup from this book is different from what I think this book is about. The setup of this book is we're following 2 main characters who meet as young children and become best friends and have this obsession with video games. And we know as we're flashing back and forward that they managed to build kind of a video game empire of their own. So we're following their journey through making video games together. But this book is about friendship. The fact that friendship is beautiful. The fact that friendship has its horrible moments too, that friendship is a deeply beautiful, deeply painful experience in life. This book made me hurt so much. The depth of space that this book gave to friendship is the space in my heart for friendship. Friendship is so, so, so important to me. And the fact that it was the thing in this book just meant so much to me, and there were so many beautiful quotes about friendship, and there were quotes about the difficulty of loving people who express their love differently than you, and all of these things. It was a love story, but not in the traditional sense, but it was a love story in the way that I deeply love, about just the connection between 2 people. I found this stuff about video games interesting too, even though I don't care at all about video games. I think I found it interesting for a couple of reasons. 1, because I don't know anything, so anything they told me I was like, sure, yeah. 2, for some reason this reminded me of Ready Player One, which it's obviously very different from that, because in Ready Player One they're playing a game actively the whole time instead of making a game. But somebody wrote in their review that it felt like a prequel to Ready Player One, and that I agree with. There was something about this that just, the writing captured me in the same way that Ready Player One did, where I don't care about video games, but I care about this book, and it happens to be about video games. That same thing happened to me for both books, Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow, and Ready Player One. Also, I just love characters who are deeply obsessed with things. It makes me care about those things too, because the way that they describe them and interact with those things, it makes them fascinating to me. And I just loved how video games were a backdrop for the way that these characters communicated. And I think it said so many things about art and how art can communicate in ways that sometimes words can't and conversations can't. There were also parts of this book about how friendship matters to the people not just in the friendship, but the people who care about those individual people. So the truth of the matter is that one of the main characters, Sam, was very, very lonely as a child. And so the impact that this friendship had, not just on him, but on like his guardians and the people who loved him, that was beautiful to me. That was so, yeah, there was one thing I cried at, and it was in regards to that. 5 stars. Like, I can't say much happened except like a lot of feeling. I just felt the whole time that I was reading it. I just felt. I think it's rare to find books that can make you feel the whole time. And even at the start where I was like, I don't know where this is going, I felt myself drawn to read it. So I'm giving it 5 stars with my whole heart. Lizzie, this was such an excellent pick. What a way to start the video. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. 5 stars. Let's talk about The Pairing by Casey McQuiston, which was my pick for Adriana from Carbon Bonded Books. I'm giving it 5 stars. I was reading some reviews after I finished this, and clearly not everybody agrees with me, because some of them rated it very poorly. A lot of them said that the main character was insufferable, and I disagree. I thought the main character was a human and also neurodivergent and interesting to follow. And yeah, didn't believe in themselves and had a bit of a complex, but who doesn't, really? So anyway, this book. How to explain the setup for this book? The backdrop of this book is this European food tour. Okay, our 2 main characters are on this European food tour that they booked to go on together. They grew up as best friends and then turned into lovers. But the interesting thing is they booked this trip a couple years ago, and on their way to this trip, they broke up. And so they didn't end up going on the trip when they were supposed to. They each ended up with like a ticket that they could use in the future, and they accidentally end up on the exact same tour at the exact same time with one another. They are both clearly not over one another, and they end up having this competition to see how many people in the different European cities they can woo, as it were. Basically a body count for this, just to try and compete against each other, which is ridiculous, but it's what they're doing. I think this book changed for me around the 50% mark. In the first half, we're reading from Theo's perspective. They are training to be a sommelier. They are obsessed with wine. I don't drink, so the fact that I could find anything they thought about wine interesting was a testament, I think, to the quality of the writing. And their life is just an utter disaster, and they're very self-destructive. Halfway through the book, we switch into Kit's perspective. Kit is a pastry chef. He lives in France, and he is so obsessed with Theo. And I think his perspective really, the book was already good. I was going to probably give it a 4 stars. Halfway through, we switched into Kit's mind. I loved living in Kit's mind so much. Kit was so poetically dramatic, I would say. And some people in reviews were like, Kit shouldn't have been obsessed with Theo. They didn't deserve it. I love the idea that we can be undeserving of love from people and get it anyway, and that people can think we're awesome without us needing to be perfect. I think that's as it should be, because if you only qualify to get love, if you're perfect or deserving in some way, none of us are going to be loved, right? We're humans. That's just not going to happen. So I actually loved that about Kit. Kit was very aware of some of the bad things about Theo, but Kit very unconditionally was obsessed with Theo anyway. It was also nice to see a like less self-destructive view. Well, it was self-destructive in a different way. Theo's was like out loud self-destructive. Kit was like a turning inward, like, because I love you, I will do this and take what I can and like make that be enough and forever be sad afterwards, but like take what happiness I can. There's something so addictive about that type of drama. I don't know. So I loved following them. I was rooting for them as individuals and as a couple. I enjoyed spending my time with them. The writing, in my opinion, was so good. The characters definitely had chemistry. I don't think it mattered that we didn't get to see a ton of them like pre-breakup in the story. It was clear that they had a connection. I understood that connection. Some people in reviews said they didn't. I didn't have that same problem. I also felt like the writing was so good in terms of the food, because Casey McQuiston described all this food and wine, and most of it I would never ever want to try. I'm such a picky eater. Casey McQuiston made it sound incredible though. So I will not be trying that food, but I enjoyed the experience of reading about it. How about that? So 5 stars. I just liked this one. How do I even begin to talk about this book? I guess I could tell you who picked it. For my Ruby pick, I read Brotherless Night. I'm giving it 5 stars. A very strong, very solid, very easy to give 5 stars. I feel like this is just one of my favorite books now. Period. Full stop. And I have a lot of feelings about it. I guess I can tell you what it's about. It's primarily set in the 1980s, following this young woman. She's a teenager at the time, and we're following the early years of the Sri Lankan Civil War, which I knew absolutely nothing about before reading this book, which is kind of horrific because it only ended in 2009, and I was very much alive in 2009. Granted, I was a child, but it's definitely something that the United States didn't pay enough attention to, I would say. There are plenty of things where that's the case today too. So I felt like this was an important book. The position that the main character is in is a very interesting one because she wants to be a doctor, which is relevant to the story, and she also has 4 brothers. As the story begins, we see what happens to each of her brothers as the militant organization starts taking over and fighting in the area and recruiting locals. It's one of the most horrific books I've ever read, and I think a lot of its horror comes from the fact that a lot of the worst things about it are based on absolutely true things. So like there was this one scene that I had to like walk to dinner in silence after, because that's all my brain could do. And I looked it up after, and it was like very much based off of a real event. And I was like, I don't even know how to like put that, I don't know how to insert that into my view of the world, you know? It was just brutal. It was brutal. And I loved the way it was written. The author did something many times throughout the book. It was a very like direct speaking to the reader tone where she would say like, you have to understand. And then she would say something about the situation. And I found that so intriguing. And I really tried to take our narrator to heart. And in those moments, especially pause and like read those sentences a couple of times and try and like really understand them because they were the points she was trying to really emphasize. And I think one thing that I'm definitely guilty of in my reading is disconnecting myself in some ways and being this outside observer. And I like to read to understand other people, but I'm bad at like putting myself in their perspective, imagining if I was standing where they are now, like how would I feel? Because especially when you read books like this, like that's heavy, that's a lot to hold. But I forced myself to do that with this book, and I think it made all the difference in how I read it. I think if you went in this book and you were just trying to get to the end of this book, you'd be reading a fundamentally different book than if you went in and you were like, I'm going to show up intentionally with these characters and listen to their story and think about my life and how it's different from theirs and all that encompasses. I think it's a great book regardless, but as with almost every book, I think your mindset while you read it impacts your enjoyment of the work. That's just with art in general. And I'm very happy to say that I feel like I had the mindset that I needed to truly enjoy and get through this book. It was so heavy. I mean, I think the saddest I've been while reading a book, maybe ever. I teared up multiple times. I didn't full on boohoo cry at all, but usually if a book is sad, I'll like tear up like once, maybe. But multiple times, and just it was just heavy, but I think it was heavy with purpose. I think if things are just sad just to be sad, I'm not really sure about that, but there was to me such a clear message behind this sadness and heaviness and horror. So yeah, I don't know what to say other than that. I loved it, and I've been thinking about this book since I finished it. And even while I was reading it, I had to like put other books aside and just like sit in silence sometimes and think about it, or like Google things and research things. It really made me think, and I like that from a book sometimes. Not all the times. If all my reads were that heavy, that would be hard, but I think once in a while, that's exactly what I need and I'm looking for. It was a lot, and I'm so glad I read it. So Ruby, thanks for the recommendation. Yeah, just thanks. I don't think everybody's going to love this book the same way I did. I know it has a very, very good rating on Goodreads. It won the Women's Prize for Fiction, I'm pretty sure. And so it has a like 4.5 or a higher on Goodreads, like very highly rated. And I think it completely deserves that. But I still don't think it's for everybody. Like, not everybody wants to read with this purpose, and that's fine. Read for the reasons that you want to read. But if you enjoy understanding lives that aren't your own, if you really want to take time to contemplate the things that other people in this world are holding right now, then I recommend this book. It was so good. And I feel really bad for whatever book I read next, because like, how is something going to measure up to this? You know, the books before it got a really fair shot, and that reflected in their 5-star ratings. And I'm sorry to the book that comes after this, because like, I don't even know what to do with myself anymore. Okay. Objectively, I know I should not feel bad about giving a book 3.5 stars. It's a good rating. It means I enjoyed the book. But after this 5-star streak, it feels criminal to do this to one of my friends. Danielle, I'm sorry. Here's the thing. I feel especially bad about this because Danielle and I famously have different opinions about books. There are so many books that I love that Danielle hates, and vice versa. We have some things we align perfectly on, but like the joke always is that we disagree on books. I wanted to give Danielle the absolute best chance here, so I wanted to read Know My Name by Chanel Miller because I'd been meaning to read that book and I knew I would love it. But when I went to make this video, the library line was too long. So I went with an option that I could get on KU right away, and I read The Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi, which was good, but it was a 3.5 stars. And so I'm so sorry, Danielle, to disappoint. This one's on me. For sure, 100%. I did you dirty, and I'm so sorry about it. But I did like the book, okay? I liked the book. This book is a pirate adventure story. We're following this fearsome female captain, Amina Al-Sarafi, as she goes back into the business after 10 years. She basically had retired and she's been away from her ship for 10 years, and then somebody gives her an offer she cannot resist, and she decides to return to sea for this one and only mission, and things do not go according to plan. Otherwise, why would we read this book? It's a fun book, fun concept. I enjoyed Amina as a character. She's not a young adult, right? She's fully into her adulthood. She had a child 10 years ago. Like, she is established, and I feel like we rarely get to read from characters, especially in adventure stories, who aren't just young, sprightly things. So I enjoyed that about her. I felt like she was a real human. The writing style wasn't my absolute favorite, and it was just so action-packed, which is to be expected, right? It's a rollicking high seas adventure. That's what supposedly you would want from that type of book, right? Except I'm me, and action sequences are hard for my brain. And yeah, that made it difficult, especially after reading so many 5-star reads. It just wasn't nearly as easy for me to get swept up in this story. I think I would consider reading more books in this series, but I wouldn't be like foaming at the mouth to do so. And if I want an action adventure-y pirate book, then I would choose this one. I just feel like maybe that's not my vibe. Not pirates in general, but the like fast-paced books. Fast-paced books, not really my thing, which is ironic because I read a lot of them and I enjoy a lot of them, much like I enjoyed this one, but they rarely, if ever, get huge ratings. This was fully my bad, and I realized that. And I, again, want to emphasize, I liked this book. I don't know what else to say in defense of myself. I don't have any excuses, I guess. It is what it is. I made a decision. I don't regret it. I'm glad I read this book because I enjoyed it. But I do feel terrible about this. So just, Danielle, don't look at me right now. It's time to talk about Ashley's pick. Ashley was one of my first booktube friends. Love her dearly. She's mainly on Instagram now. Although I love my time with her and I love my conversations with her, fantasy is like by far and away her favorite genre. And I always say that fantasy is my least favorite genre. So I'm always a bit hesitant when I read one of her favorites from the previous year because I know most of my choices will be fantasy. But this year I read The Serpent and the Wings of Night, which is the first book in this vampire fantasy series. And I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it, and I'll definitely be continuing with the series. It also read so quickly, too. I read it in like 2 days. So that's always a good feeling when something is like compulsively readable. The best way that I could describe how it felt to read this book for you is like the Hunger Games with vampires, almost. Our main character is a human. Through a series of life events, she has been raised by the king of the vampires, and now it's time for this thing. Oh no, forget the name, but it's this big, bloody, deathly event where people can pledge their souls to a goddess and fight, and whoever survives gets like one wish from the goddess, basically. And so her wish is going to be that she will no longer be a frail human, but that she will be able to be powerful, potentially a vampire, and be able to stay with her adoptive father forever. And you might be wondering, why couldn't he just turn her into a vampire? In this particular world, turning somebody is never like a sure thing. Most people die while being turned, and so they don't want to risk it. Although the chances of her dying in this particular game, I would say statistically a higher chance of her dying during this event than in the turning, because they were saying like maybe 2/3 of people die during the process of turning, but like all but one of the contestants die in this event. So that's, the math is not mathing. I guess what we can say for vampires is maybe math is not their strong suit. Regardless, she enters this event. She's the only human in the event. The rest of them are vampires. She's an incredible human fighter, but she's drastically underpowered compared to them. And she kind of makes an unlikely alliance in the course of this game, and things go from there. I don't know why, it just very much felt like Hunger Games, but with vampires. So that's how I'm describing it. I enjoyed the characters. It felt fun to read. Like I just had a really good time picking it up. So 4 stars it is. Thanks, Ashley, for the recommendation. Believe me when I say nobody is more surprised about what's about to happen than I am. I'm giving Fourth Wing 4.5 stars. Let's back up. So I finally read Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros for Bailey's pick. I was so skeptical when I saw this on Bailey's list. Last year, it was on Ashley's list, and that made total sense to me because she's a fantasy girly. And yeah, Bailey likes fantasy, but like still, I was still surprised for some reason to see it on her list. And so I was like, fine, I'll read it. I had a hold on it forever. I'd been clicking deliver later. I just had this feeling I wasn't going to like this book. Part of that was, I'll admit it, the countercultural part of me that was like, oh, everybody's loving this book, so I'll probably hate it. It's not something I like about myself, but it happens from time to time. But I went in with an open mind. I was like, Ashley loves it. Bailey loved it. Let's see what it's all about. And I just had a really, really good time reading it. I don't think it was perfect. Obviously, I'm giving it 4.5 stars, not a 5. And even 5 stars can have flaws. I don't even know how to talk about this book. If you aren't aware of Fourth Wing by now, here's the best way that I can describe it to you. You remember how earlier in this vlog, I said that Serpent of Wings and Night was the Hunger Games with vampires. I'm going to do the same thing here where I say this book was like insert 2010's dystopian book that was really big here, but with insert fantastical creature here. So this one was like Divergent with dragons, which was awesome. We're following this girl. She's being conscripted into the army. Her mother is this very famous general, and her mother is forcing her to join the Dragon Rider quadrant, even though she spent her whole life preparing to become a scribe. Like, she does not belong in the Rider quadrant. At least she doesn't seem like she would. She has some health issues, especially with her joints, and so she's kind of like on the physically weaker side. and they just think she's gonna die immediately, but her mom is like, you still have to do it, it's family legacy, blah, 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 blah. So she goes to try and become a dragon rider, and we're following her journey. There was just something that was addictive about this. I would say at the beginning, I was like, okay, I'm following, not sure where it's going, but fine. In the middle, I was loving it. And then the last 25%, I was like, fine, sure. In particular, I think that half star was lost by one scene. There's a scene between the main character and the love interest in this book, and choices are made by the author about how magical powers manifest in that scene that made me laugh out loud, not in a good way and not when I should be laughing. And that just took me so completely out of it. I hated that. I hated that decision. I'm not sure I would have made a different decision if I was writing this book, because I understand why it was made, but I hated it regardless. That was my moment of hate with this book, but the rest of it I really enjoyed. And the ending, what a cliffhanger. I'll be continuing with this series. Except I am worried, because oftentimes at the start of a series, I'll be like, okay, I like this because we're at a school setting, or we're in a tournament of some kind. In this one, we're technically in a school setting, but it's also like a competition. They're just trying to stay alive, right? Then after the first book, something happens that disrupts the system that this fantasy world is built on, or this sci-fi world, or whatever. This other world is built on a system, and we start breaking the system down. And that's when I start losing interest. I think revolution is a good thing. Obviously, I think there's power in the people, and people should focus on doing things that are right instead of the things that are the same way that they have always been. But it's just this pattern where I'm like, I'm here for the trope of like a school setting or a tournament, and then you just turn it into a war, and I don't care. And wars mean lots of action sequences, and I don't like action sequences. So that's hard for me. So I think it is the case for both The Serpent and the Wings of Night and also Fourth Wing, that I'm like, the first books were good enough that I'll continue the series, and I'm like a little worried that the rest of the series is going to ruin the first book in some ways for me, or not meet that expectation just because we are breaking the systems. I said it this way to my sister the other day. I was like, the unfortunate thing about a lot of these books with wars in them is that the characters are working to break a system, but the system is what's interesting about the world. So they're trying to get rid of the thing that's interesting about the world, which, like, I don't think is a full or nuanced view on it, but it is just a thought, right? In the real world, I want systems to change. I want us to keep improving. In books, sometimes the way it's set up is the interesting way, you know? So that's unfortunate. But still, I'm shocked by this one. I mean, I know that I can trust Bailey's opinion, but this one, I don't know. I get the hype. It was addictive. It was fun. It definitely made me feel like I was reading a book from the 2010s, which, what an era of literature. Am I right? Just addictive reads. Good job, Bailey. And good job me for trying this, even though I was skeptical. And this is why I cannot trust myself to pick books in general, because I'll be like, ooh, that book, I probably won't like it. And if I never read it, I wouldn't have realized how much I enjoyed it. I'm not sure if I learned the right lesson here. Regardless, good book, yay. My final book for this whole challenge is from the list of Kayla, from Kayla Ray Reads, and I read The Teacher, because I was like, LOL, Kayla is a teacher. Obviously, not like the teachers in this book, because this is a mystery thriller. It's more of a thriller than a mystery. Yeah, I'm not sure that there's a mystery. It is all thriller, by Frida McFadden, who I think is known at this point for writing addictive, fast-paced thrillers. And this was no different. And for pure addictiveness, 4 stars. I don't think there was anything truly special about this book, but it was still really fun to read. I read it so quickly, and I couldn't put it down. The chapters were so short, I was just flipping the pages on my Kindle. So more like just clicking, but still flying through it. Like, I expected it to take more of this week to finish this book than it did. Instead, I finished it on the weekend, and I expected it to go into like the week afterwards. So that's crazy. What is this one about? Great question. We're following 2 main perspectives. We're following Eve. She's a math teacher at a school. She has fallen out of love with her husband, who is an English teacher at the same school. And then we are following Addie, and she is a high schooler at this school. She got in some trouble last year, which we find about a bit more as we go along. And so she has been made a social outcast at the start of this year, and she's in both Eve's class and her husband Nate's class. We kind of see what happens in those various connections. And yeah, it's a thrill-tastic time. It kind of seems like it's not the setup for a thriller, but when you read the prologue, somebody is digging a grave. So clearly something is going to happen. What I have to say about Frida McFadden, the writing just flows. Is it the finest art ever? No, probably not. But my brain does not get caught up in the writing. It is absolutely smooth sailing. I know what's happening always. I know the things that I'm supposed to know, right? Obviously in a thriller, sometimes the author keeps things from you. I know things. I will say there was a huge twist at the end, like a reveal more than a twist, I would say. And I'm not really buying it, particularly because like two characters had a connection, and yet I felt like that connection would have been obvious to the readers in a different situation. Like I can't say anything without spoiling it because it was literally like a last minute reveal, but I didn't buy it. It did make me go, but then made me go, wait a second. And I think that pulled me out of it a little. I think this book would have been fine without that last minute reveal, good as is. Still fun though, but I will just say, if you've read this book, maybe you know the reveal that I'm talking about. I just don't buy it. I thought that was not executed as well as it could be throughout the story. The reveal was obviously executed well, but I feel like if you looked back in the story, you'd be like, no, I'm not buying this, because that's how I felt. Regardless, 4 stars. What a way to end this. So I guess let's jump to future me and wrap up my thoughts on this whole process. Yay, friends. So those were the reads. Obviously wildly successful. When my lowest score is a 3.5 star, you know it's a good vlog, right? You know I had a good time reading. So thank you to all of my friends for their recommendations. Let's talk some numbers a bit. My average rating for this video is a 4.428, so like a 4.43. That's insane. Usually I feel like I sit around 3.5 stars. So almost 4.5. Watch out, world. I liked these books. It's not a competition, but if it were, Ruby would win with Brotherless Night. That book is in my brain. Ruby read this in a vlog last year, and as soon as she read it, I added it to my want to read list and placed a hold on it. So I'm glad I finally got to get around to it and that I did love it as much as I thought I would. But really, all of my friends are winners, or really I'm the winner here, because I have such fantastic friends and read so many fantastic books. And yeah, I recommend all of these books, actually, even Fourth Wing. With that said, I'm going to end this vlog here. If you'd like to go ahead and give it a big thumbs up, comment down below, have you read any of these books, or what was your favorite book of last year? And subscribe for more bookish and college lifestyle content. And until next time, bye humans, bye!